Hello, everyone. I hope, Sean, that we're all together now. Is that right?
Yes, apologies for the slight delay to this morning session, but we're all good to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this keynote presentation from Lorraine Sands in New Zealand. My name is Whāriki, and I'm your chair for this session. I have been a trustee for ESERA for many years and attended conferences for about 27 years for my in-service training and development. And I was formerly a director of Pen Green Centre for Children and Families in Corby and the research base there. Some of you will be watching this live, while others will be watching this later as a recording. And however you're watching it, I am absolutely certain you're going to enjoy Lorraine's talk. If you're watching it live, whilst your cameras and microphones can't be switched on, you can engage with us in two different ways. Firstly, you can use the chat function to say hello, share your thoughts or reactions, and I can see things are coming in already, and speak to Lorraine and develop a dialogue. Secondly, you can submit a question to Lorraine via the Q&A section below. And at the end of your talk, I'll put some of your questions to Lorraine. If you're watching this later as a recording, you can also leave comments in the comments section beneath the video. I need to remind you very politely that all posts are public and that all comments should be made professionally and courteously, and I'm sure you'll do that. Any comments made in the chat function will show the username you've logged in with today and will appear in the recording of the session. If you want to make a comment, please make sure you post it to all panelists and attendees so that everyone watching can see what you've written. So it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce Lorraine today. I've had the privilege of visiting the Girton ECE Centre in Tauranga, based in New Zealand's North Island, close to the Bay of Plenty. This was more than 15 years ago when I was searching the world for outstanding practice with children from 0 to 3, and I found it in the Girton Centre. I wanted to immerse myself in their practice, and other staff from Pen Green have visited more recently, and we continue to be awed by the powerful work that goes on there. Lorraine has given keynotes in England and across Western Europe, Japan, America, as well as continuing to support the Girton team. She works intensively with the Educational Leadership Project as a professional learning facilitator, supporting early years education and care teams across New Zealand to strengthen their pedagogic engagement. Lorraine is a strong leader, an insightful researcher, and an inspiring pedagogue. She is a powerful and formidable advocate for children, and very significantly for all early childhood education and care practitioners. And in today's presentation, she demonstrates how critical it is that we always think about things from the children's perspective and attempt to find answers to the children's questions. So welcome, Lorraine, and over to you.
Thank you, Margie. Well, I hope I can do that introduction justice. I'll go straight to sharing our screen though, and so bear with me for one moment. Okay, so I hope you can see that clearly. Right, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, our greetings begin with sharing the places and the people who are important to us. Nature is deeply connected part of this process. I would like to share those greetings with you all and bring best wishes from colleagues and friends in Aotearoa, New Zealand in this time of great uncertainty. Yet I think in this time where there is such desire to find ways to support each other. From a Te Ao Māori tradition, the mountain that speaks to your heart is the first shared in greetings. I'm sure many of you will feel connected to your own mountain because mountains project a majestic presence that inspires awe and wonder. Ko Moa Te Mona Te Runei Taku Nako. The other great natural phenomenon that is shared is the river that connects you to place and people. Rivers have the capacity to soothe as they meander along. They also have the ability to excite, as anyone rafting in a grade 5 rapid will be able to tell you. And learning is a lot like this, sometimes smooth and comfortable, and at other times adventurous and invigorating. Ko wairo te awa e mahia ne aku maharahara. ko Lorraine, no Tauranga ho. I'm from Tauranga in the Bay of Plenty, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Māori as tangata whenua, the people of this land, use the word whānau when talking about family, and the addition of the word kaupapa adds the dimension we all might think of as a community of learners with values and work ethics that bind us together in ways that can be described as connections that mirror familial ties, hence why we include these important people communities in our greetings too. Ko Greaton Early Learning Centre to kaupapa whānau, ko Educational Leadership Project to kaupapa whānau. I've worked with and alongside the people in these organisations for an excess of 20 years, and they mean a great deal to me. In terms of shared growth, we have been listening to each other, stretching each other's learning, all the while striving to be the wisest possible selves. You all will have people like this too in your lives, to be treasured, to be supported, and to make that difference together that comes from collaborative endeavour through a shared purpose. And I recognise the ancestral and spiritual landmarks of Tauranga where I live. E mihi ana, ki ngā tohu e nehe o Ngaitirangi o Ngātirangi o Ngaitipukenga o e noho neo, ko Lorraine Sands taku ingoa. Now, being grounded in a sense of place and culture is very important to us in Aotearoa, New Zealand, just as it is for the people everywhere to feel a sense of belonging and well-being in the cultures and languages that speak to each of us. Our early childhood curriculum in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to Whāriki, is a bicultural document that expects teachers, educators and researchers to honour both Māori and Pākehā signatures to the Treaty of Waitangi, our founding treaty document. This means we are committed to listen to each other, work in partnership, and through participation, protect our youngest, most vulnerable citizens as they seek to find out about their world through their languages, their cultures, and through these social and cultural experiences, continue building an identity as competent, capable learners. And many of you will feel this sense because of your own curricula, that an early learning curriculum ought to be one that enables each and every child to thrive as learners in action, in a connected, community-oriented way, not as an institution structured and excessively rule-bound. Prescriptive learning environments cannot be embedded in strong, long-term relationships that are responsive and reciprocal. So as I first listened to the focus for this conference, I felt a very real sense of connection for the idea of promoting democratic pedagogies, where respect and participation is not a given gift, but a mutual process, one that asks us to create a relational form of living moment by moment. The conference focus seemed to me to require a deep sensitivity to listen to each other. It seemed too to be focused on children's rights to participate in learning with an agency that enables them to thrive, because learning is, in Michael Fullan's words, irresistibly engaging. This is why these questions, do you know me? Can I trust you? Do you let me fly? Do you hear me? Is this place fair for us? From the child's perspective, have such a resonance for teacher educators in New Zealand, where they were first generated from the research of Professor Margaret Carr, one of our truly respected academics. As teacher educators, we think of her as our professor because we have felt listened to and nurtured as action researchers ourselves. It is this mixing of identities, I think, that has been a catalyst for teachers seeing themselves as learners first, teachers, of course, but researchers too, as we think deeply about what it means to generate spaces where learning flourishes. It has also meant that we have reconsidered our view of children. We see children as learners, as teachers too, and as the quintessential researcher, as they theorize, practice, and learn from their engagements with the people, places, and things in their world. These questions then are important, for they hold the promise that learning and teaching will be wrapped around the uniqueness of the child. If we truly know each child and they trust us to offer an environment, one worthy of the immense curiosity children bring to their learning, then we will be in the first instance listeners. We will hear what children want to tell us, both in their gesture and their voice, and the learning setting will be one that is fair for each and every one of us. Now, fairness means negotiation, for what is fair for me won't necessarily be fair for you. This is democracy in action and a view that citizenship for the very young is their right, one worth grappling over to figure out what this means in terms of culture, language, and identity, one worth putting our energies behind advocacy to ensure meaningful learning can occur. Now, the photos in this slide show children from my learning, teaching and research setting at Great and Early Learning Centre climbing our much-loved local mountain, Moa. This place has long been very special to me for many reasons, and one important one is as a metaphor for a philosophy of learning. I think that really understanding what it is we value as learners and teachers and dreaming those big, inspirational, aspirational dreams projects a pathway to ensure we make valued learning visible and reach the goals we set for ourselves, particularly as a community together. In effect, we look at that mountain from afar in its totality and consider the big vision. This means nurturing relationships through up close and personal connections as well. For here in connection is the place that truly gives us insight into whether our learning spaces are ones that enable us all to thrive as lifelong learners. This takes the hard effort, the praxis involved in climbing that metaphorical mountain. Kalina Rinaldi has talked about this very eloquently and persuasively when she says, if we believe that children possess their own theories, interpretations, and questions, and we are protagonists in the knowledge building processes, then the most important verbs in educational practice are no longer to talk, to speak, or to transmit, but to listen. Listening means being open to others and what they have to say. This is a high expectation for teacher educators who work with and alongside children every day, for leaders and politicians who generate the climate of possibility and the funding for ideas to become reality, and for researchers who support teacher educators and policymakers to understand what inspirational learning environments with all the complexities that these entail might look like. This role between teacher educators and researchers can be a very powerful adjunct for change when we work collaboratively together. When teacher educators consider what kind of learning culture we are nurturing within our settings, using a research-focused process, we engage in possibility thinking that can cause us to shift taken for granted perspectives. Peter Moss and Pat Petrie explain this. They say, introducing a critical attitude towards those things that are given to our present experience, as if they are timeless, natural, unquestionable. It is a matter of introducing kind of awkwardness into the fabric of one's experience, of interrupting the fluency of the narratives that encode that experience and making them stutter, puzzling over them together and taking a different pathway as a result. Sometimes this is very difficult, for it takes brave pedagogues, brave researchers to step outside of the conventional, the usual, the accepted, and advocate for change. This must be solution-based to have any chance of taking possibility thinking into reality. It requires research to do this effectively, and it is not until we climb that mountain with and alongside the people in our community of learners that we get to see what these values really look, sound, and feel like, and perhaps an insight into what needs to change to achieve them. It's this up close and personal connection that is so important to children. Are we, for example, offering an environment that is worthy of the immense curiosity children bring to their learning? Are we prepared to be truly responsive and listen to children's deep-seated interests? I'm not talking about dinosaurs or blocks, reading or writing for that matter, or all the schoolified activities pedagogues often think essential for being ready for school. These are merely what Professor Margaret Carr has called the vehicles for the disposition to learn. Children's motivations are very important to tap into, and it is the learning how to learn that will take children far into life, into a life of learning success, whatever that may feel like to each of us. Peter Moss and Pat Petrie again, they say, when play is recognised as the norm, children are empowered by having some control over the space they occupy with adults. And I think when this happens, this then becomes a truly participatory space. Now, on the left of your screens is a learning story written about Annabelle's love of the water pond at Greaton Early Learning Centre. You may wish to read this at your leisure, as you perhaps have an opportunity to revisit this keynote. What I want to show you, though, is a very short video of children engaged in water play. As we all know with Zoom meetings, sometimes there is a lag when showing videos, and it can be difficult to watch depending on the vagaries of your internet connections, hence the short duration of this video. But one of the reasons I want to show you this is so that you get a sense of the children's joy. The other is that there is nothing scripted about this learning. It is play in the sense that Stuart Brown, in his book, Play, How It Shapes the Brain, Opens the Imagination, Invigorates the Soul, describes as apparently purposeless. Play is essentially done for its own sake. It's fun. And Stuart says that when we fully are engaged in play, we lose a sense of the passage of time. We're not locked into a rigid way of doing things. In essence, we are open to serendipity, to possibility. I hope you are now imagining the many times that you have seen this in action when you have been with children, their sense of energy, their spirit, their passions. Play too means we are willing to include seemingly irrelevant elements. This makes play fluid. And as we enjoy the process and want to keep it going, we become flexible thinkers. We see things in a different way and have fresh insights. In Professor Margaret Carr's view, we see different possible selves. So I'm just going to play this little video, and hopefully the sound will come through and it won't be too jaggedy for you. So you might have noticed too that Annabelle in this video, using a sieve to pour water on her brother's head, as you do, is careful about the amount of energy she uses. Her ability to self-regulate emotions so she doesn't overwhelm or upset him is an inherent part of this play. The social emotional learning here is immense. Yet all of this learning and much more may go unnoticed if it is not reified in some way. Hence the reason for her teacher, Melissa Osmond, choosing to write about the learning that unfolds for Annabelle through her love of water. Play can be sidelined in favour of what some people might view as more important things like didactically teaching skills and knowledge. It can be marginalised in favour of testing that those skills, very often literacy and numeracy ones, have been learnt. Yet, because Annabelle has agency to determine her own play, her learning is diverse. And her teacher, Catalina Thompson, this time discusses the diversity of her play in this learning story narrative assessment, and she offers Annabelle and her family provocative feedback aimed to support Annabelle to think deeply, to question herself, have new ideas, reflect on her learning, and take action to stretch this further. Catalina says, although at first it might seem there is no connection between, for example, figuring out, sorry, can you hear that? Because that's Suri interrupting me, as she does. We'll carry, go away, Suri. Where is she? Gone. Okay, although at first it might seem there's no connection between, for example, figuring out how to hang upside down on the swing and writing Annabelle on her artwork, these actions are, in fact, deeply connected, because they stem from that same journey, that same story of bravery and determination. It is never about the what, but the how, never about the product in itself, but the journey our children embark on in their learning quests. It is the struggle, the effort, the growth mindset, the mistakes they learn from that energize them to keep going. And as they keep going, the diverse range of skills involved in balancing upside down or gripping a writing tool to shape letters, for example, naturally evolve. That is the reason why we teachers work assiduously on empowering our children to broaden and deepen their learning dispositions. In Te Ao Māori, the child is viewed almost amongst other attributes as the learning child, because learning for the child is like contractions which come in waves. The child draws on her energy to absorb new knowledge. Annabelle is no doubt going through a massive wave of learning, powerful and unstoppable. Now, Catalina here is owning her perspective of Annabelle's learning, yet there is much more to happen if we as a community can all nurture this learning further. And Catalina goes on to intentionally write about the ways Annabelle by everyone in Annabelle's learning community might support her, as she says this quite explicitly in the next section. So how can we as a learning community nurture this learning further? The language we use is vital when engaging in conversations with Annabelle about her learning, because it has the power to empower and transform. Annabelle will find her next challenge for sure, and when she does, we shall continue celebrating it, not only verbally as it unfolds, but also in writing, in our learning stories, so that Annabelle can revisit and review her learning. In this way, Catalina is inviting Annabelle to have agency over her own learning, and she invites her family too to be part of this process, because it is knowing what happens across communities of learning, from home to setting and back again, that wider possibilities for partnership and participation can occur. And so what happens as a result of her family hearing this kind of affirmation about their daughter as a learner in action? The photos in this slide are of Annabelle and her dad, high up on our local mountain. Annabelle has a whole folder of learning stories, and her dad responds to one written about a walk in a forest with her friends and teachers. He says, Annabelle, inspired by her recent 2-kilometre redwoods bushwalk, believed she could tackle climbing the mount for the first time. Rules were set, no being carried by Dad, and she agreed. So they set out, had lots of snack breaks and rests, and she did it. The pride on her face at her achievement is evident. And Catalina responds back, and this is a really important thing. The conversation goes two ways. It is not just the teacher telling or test score rating achievement. Catalina says, oh, wow, Annabelle, how proud you must feel of your achievement. Climbing Maua is challenging and quite tricky in parts. The fact that you walked all the way up is testimony to your determination and drive to work hard to achieve things that matter to you. A great team victory. There is an essential complexity that surrounds play, and the links to lifelong learning can be obscured if we are not very aware of these links. This is certainly true for families who will have built their understanding about the learning they value from a range of sources, including the aspects that were important through their own families, their friends, from social media, books, magazines, podcasts, and the like. Indeed, families will have a vast array of perspectives, and the question arises in terms of participatory pedagogies. Just how do we draw families into a deeper understanding of play? I hope that that little video and the learning stories plus her family's response opened a window of wonder into the kind of learning that is being valued here. This pathway is far, far removed from a schoolification process, which was so decried by John Bennett when he reiterated, the early childhood centre is viewed as a life space, a place in which children and pedagogues learn to be, learn to do, learn to learn, and learn to live together. There is much to ponder in this, for it is a powerful premise for thinking about how we engage with children, families, and colleagues, moment by moment, day by day. When we wrap learning around children and consider our contexts, all of them, the physical environment, of course, yet also the relational connections inside culture and community, I think thoughtful pedagogy results because teacher educators do not then deliver a curriculum. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, we use the Māori word kāko to describe teachers. Kai means food, and ako means learning and teaching. These are never separated, just in the way Loris Malaguzzi said, learning and teaching should not stand on opposite banks and just watch the river flow by. Instead, they should embark together on a journey down the water. Through an active reciprocal exchange then, teaching can strengthen learning how to learn. In essence, kaiako are providing the sustenance for learning and teaching to be nourished. When we are responsive to each child's cultural context, each child's desire to learn with and alongside the people, places, and things that matter to them, we generate learning possibilities that go to the edge and beyond. This is why the questions from a child's perspective are so powerful. Do you know me requires a pedagogues to build relationships, emotionally connected ones. Can I trust you is embedded in a deep knowing that the adult will be there for the child and they will keep their promises, that they will make connected learning possible. Do you let me fly is about enabling each child to go beyond the ordinary into learning that speaks to the child's spirit, their energies, their passions. Do you hear me? Asks if we are truly listening to this child's questions, the spoken and the unspoken ones. This is why teacher educators who value play have been drawn into the process of writing narrative assessments and why they are deeply invested in sharing these within their learning communities, not just in New Zealand, but in many countries beyond our shores. I think learning stories have resonated around the world because story has been part of every culture since we lived in caves and painted on walls. Story is supple and culturally derived, so linking learning and teaching, learning and stories together has a great appeal. It feels meaningful. It certainly is on the opposite banks from testing. To explain this a little further, many of you will know of Professor Margaret Carr's seminal work on learning stories. Her first book was published in 2001, was called Assessment in Early Childhood Settings. This book provided the theoretical constructs for this kind of assessment process. I think learning stories have revolutionized the way teachers actually see learning unfold. Just as importantly, the writing of learning stories has generated a reconceptualization of the teacher-educator role. As teachers write about learning, the possibilities for thoughtful action is increased. We begin to consider the underlying processes that support wise practice because an analysis of learning is drawn directly from experience and from within the relationships we have with this child. This storying of learning enables that window of wonder to be open for others too, the children's families, and for the children themselves to look back through their folders as they retell and share their experiences over time. The experiences where they see themselves being brave, being kind, being determined, being thoughtful, being resilient and resourceful. Now, we've been debating what the fundamental purpose of education is for the 21st century for a very long time. Professors Margaret Carr and Guy Claxton have said, it is not so much the transmission of particular bodies of knowledge, skill and understanding, as facilitating the development of the capacity and the confidence to engage in lifelong learning. As soon as we become didactic, teaching the things we think are important, we fall into that banking model of education that Paulo Freire disparaged so much. When we attempt to fill children up with knowledge, we are closing doors and narrowing possibilities. When we slice and dice their day into curriculum fragments, a term provided by D.T. Hill, we deny the time and space children need to go beyond the superficial into complex thinking, which are the hallmarks of engaged switch-on learners. And when we direct children to do this, go there, sit still, be quiet, we are very likely disengaging them from the business of being intrinsically motivated, self-directed learners who care deeply about exploring the meaningful, the so very interesting, very often difficult puzzles they set themselves. In New Zealand, our Whāriki curriculum has enormously shaped teachers' vision of children and the way sociocultural learning communities can be designed to positively nurture learning identities. The theory for this rests on the shoulders of giants from all around the world, researchers who gave us a curriculum that we could embrace. It has enabled us to focus on the process of what it takes to be a learner inside collaborative communities where each voice can be heard. As a consequence, I think dispositions like empathy, courage, imagination, resilience, and persistence, and skills and knowledge catapult to the surface as the natural result of sustained, playful, thoughtful, cooperative inquiry. And yet we have much to learn and a very long way to go, for neoliberal politics have gotten in the way. And we need researchers who can speak to policymakers and shift risk-averse politicians from often narrow, rule-bound, negative impacting expectations that keep children siloed in rooms and behind fences and entrapped by gates. Now, rarely does learning happen in isolation from others though. And when we see learning as connection, we begin to understand how relationships must envelop and protect each child's growing identity as a learner. Teachers who write about the edgy, open-ended learning that happens as children play powerfully contribute to children's views of themselves. This doesn't mean that learning happens easily. That's not the point. It is inside the feelings generated in the process of learning that children build an understanding of themselves as learners who don't give up, as learners who like to trial innovative ideas, as learners who enjoy the stimulation of tricky, challenging goals, and the camaraderie generated through playing together. I very much love the way Professor Wally Penatito, a kaumātua who is a Māori elder and academic, describes children's essence. Children are vibrant, expressive and impressive. If we are to meaningfully engage with our children's questions, then we must be able to see, really see, in these heart-energized ways. This whakatoki, which is a Māori proverb utilising the wisdom of old, emphasises that in our commonality, we are all different. In early learning, we celebrate those differences while maintaining our relationship with each other. This gives us incredible opportunity to make a difference in young children's learning lives, and it comes with awesome responsibility to make sure we do just this. Children's social and emotional competence too flourish in play. They build working theories, which in essence are ideas in motion. Because children who are up for challenge realise that anything worth doing takes time, effort, patient exploration, and a willingness to explore possibilities with and alongside their friends. These kinds of experiences actively build a community where working collaboratively is valued by everyone there, and in so doing, lay down the foundation for communities to nurture kindness, for communities that value diversity, enjoy difference, seeing this as engendering a richness that is much to offer all of us. I wonder too if children might be asking us if their ideas can be the focus of their play, without adult interference, without a preset goal that determines the kinds of questions teachers ask. Might they be asking if they can choose the time, the space for their play to unfold in ways that generate an excitement to keep exploring? And might they be asking, can they do this with the people who are important to them, with teachers who wait to be invited into conversations, not ones imposed on them by well-meaning teachers, or learning pathways that are hijacked into the teacher's perspective of where this learning could or ought to go. So time is important in this view, for scheduled, time-bound routines or activities destroy creative thought processes when they cut across motivated, engaged learners in the act of doing. Honi Tūwhare, a much treasured poet, wrote this poem Rhodes decades ago, yet it has a poignancy for the way learning unfolds. Easy pathways are not sought in favour of the fascinating, the vibrant, the extraordinary. And Honi says, I turn away from roads, signposted hot macadams, road on smooth roads curving, looping under, up and yonder, going, leading nowhere. I dream of roads, but seek instead a tumble, stumble-footed course I know will earn me sad wounds, cutting deep to bone. I have learned to love too much, perhaps, rough tracks, hard of going, poorly lit by stars. Night-long voyagings have found no easy path to the silent gate that is the dawn, the truth beyond that is the banished city, hearing only the night bird booming as ancient blasphemies, moon dark ease reflection in the knocking stones, the river chortling. Honi is not suggesting an easy path. Learning to love the process of learning, the sheer hard work, not necessarily the prize at the end. And how often do we ruin this with a certificate, a gratuitous prize, a behaviourally motivated way to gain children's compliance? And so to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, to see the world anew with awe and wonder. Carol Dweck says the passion for stretching yourself and sticking to it, even or especially when it's not going well, is the hallmark of the growth mindset. This is the mindset that allows people to thrive during some of the most challenging times in their lives. And I think we need this just at this moment in time where working as a community is more necessary than ever. Now, I had hoped to show you this learning story to you, and you will see how much stuff the children have got in these actually they're boys, depending on which country you come from, and how they have agency to take this around the community, and how they've spent all day doing this. But I think I've run out of time, but I'll just leave it on the screen just in case you are interested and you could read it in your leisure. And so this is the learning story. The title, Focused, Organised, Determined, Resourceful. You can see that it's full of dispositional words. And I watched this play unfold throughout the day, and it's called to be written down, to be celebrated and to be remembered. And I think that's what happens when teachers become so thoroughly immersed in learning that they see unfolding that they do want to write about this. But of course, it requires them being given the time and space to do this too. And that requires leaders and researchers to ensure that the professional learning opportunities that teachers have are immersed in this understanding of what play really looks like and how it generates a lifelong learning disposition, to be learners in action, to be able to take this world on in all of its complexities and flourish. So I think when children very deliberately, with inquiry uppermost, investigate open-ended resources, they play around with ideas and experiment for long periods of time. They often chat about their ideas with their friends, teachers, and families, and formulate working theories as they figure out how this world works. So are our learning and teaching environments interesting, trustworthy, challenging, listening, collaborative? This is a very big question, a very big question. And this is how we can work together to figure this out so that it's meaningful for each and every person. However, if we can say for each and every child that our environment in the sense of curriculum as a sum total of everything that happens is indeed interesting, trustworthy, challenging, listening, and collaborative, then the answers to our children's questions will be ones that are meaningful to each child, each individual child. We hear about the 20% tail, the children failing. This is a disgrace. No child should be in this kind of statistic. As individuals, as communities, as nations, we must be there to make that difference, to be that difference, and not allow this to happen. Peter Gray, one of our favourite theorists, has said, when children are provided with the freedom to pursue their own interests in safe settings, they bloom and develop along diverse and unpredictable paths. And they acquire the skills and confidence required to meet life's challenges. So with this in mind, what will our own legacy be, moment after moment, day after day, year after year, as we intentionally nurture the children in our settings to build the brain they will have for their lifetime? What impact will we have? What impact are we having? This goes to the heart of our philosophies and deep into our practice, for as the brain science shows us, what we do really matters. Alison Gopnik, who was a keynote at Isera in Dublin, has this to say in her book, The Gardener and the Carpenter. Our job is not to shape our children's minds. It's to let those minds explore all the possibilities that the world allows. At a core level, it is how we listen to children and enable them to pursue the things that interest them. There's a challenge here, for we must ensure children's motivation to learn comes from deep within, and we must do this without hijacking children's agendas, their energies, their passions, and their spirits. So leave room for imagination, for possibility, for creative energy to thrive. And if we do this, we will not fall into the trap of institutionalizing early childhood. Instead, we will generate a living space, one full of possibility for children to thrive and for this world to have hope. Let the uniqueness of the child guide our work. And finally, there is much to do and much to research to ensure we understand what to do. We have all come too far not to go further. We have all done too much not to do more. Thank you. I'll stop sharing and escape. And come back to you, Margie.
Okay. Okay. I think I'm on now. Thank you, Lorraine. I knew it would be wonderful and inspiring, and there were all sorts of comments coming in that people feel invigorated to start their day with this. But I'm sure some people will be very wakeful thinking about everything you've said. I mean, I'm holding on to the notion of brave pedagogues and brave researchers advocating for change, and providing these inspirational environments worthy of the children's passion for learning. So I'm holding on to that, and I'm going to be storming into a playgroup this afternoon and my grandson's school tomorrow, Lorraine, and showing them your PowerPoint. I think Sean's sorting out all the questions that are coming in, and I've spotted quite a few myself, but I thought I'd kick off with one because I know that conference participants, Lorraine, will be blown away by some of the practice you've shown on your slides and videos, and will be thinking about the settings they know, or the settings they work in and research in, and how they could also build rich democratic partnerships with children and their families. How do you help early years practitioners to undertake such respectful practice and advocate on behalf of children so very successfully in your community?
And that's a very big question, Margie, because I think it takes obviously commitment and a belief that children have the right for this to happen. And so we must make sure that our own integrity is evident in the way we support children to do this. Now, teachers are often confined inside spaces that aren't as inspirational as they could be. But there's still lots to do if we show children dispositions ourselves, dispositions to be creative, to be energetic, to speak our minds, but with respect and kindness, of course, but not to give up. And so it's a long, long time in the making. And I'm sure anybody who is listening to this from New Zealand will know currently of all the action that teachers are trying to put forward to get pay parity, for example, with primary and secondary schools, because it should never be about shoe size. It's about the professionalism of the early childhood teachers, their passion to be committed. But I don't think this should happen outside of their workspace. I think that they ought to be granted it's professional courtesy, isn't it, to enable them to do the work they need to within their working environment day, not to expect them to go home when their well-being is being nurtured by their families. When they go home, they should be putting their feet up, having them massaged and whatever rocks your boat in terms of your choice of beverage. And then they come back the next day and they're full of energy, re-energized to do this work that takes every commitment from teachers, because it is physically tiring. If you go home not tired, you'd be wondering what's happening. If you go home not dirty as well, you'll have to wonder whether you've really been playing alongside children. And there's this emotional component to learning with and alongside children that takes everything out of you. Plus, of course, the intellectualism as we think about, should I keep my mouth shut and listen? Or have I been invited into being a resource here? Can I add additional language that will help this play to unfold in a way without, as I said before, hijacking children's own agendas?
Fabulous. Thank you for that. And the first time I've ever heard pay conditions and that mentioned at an ISERA conference. So it is about the professionalism of our workforce and respect for them. Thank you. Sean, do you have some questions?
We do have some questions. We've had a few come in. Some have overlapped, so I'll kind of condense them in, but thank you everyone for submitting them. So the first one is, I'm sorry, a couple of them have referenced yesterday's talk by Professor Torres, Lorraine, which I know you heard and talked about the sort of
I did. I was up at 2 a.m. this morning listening to that.
There's some of the chiming themes that are sort of between the two of your talks. You mentioned politicians as providing possibilities towards the start of your talk, and yesterday Professor Torres talked about increasing political polarization globally. So the question is, as educators in early childhood who often feel they're not heard, do you have any advice to those particularly living in countries where there's less professional autonomy?
That's a powerful question, and I saw it and hoped it would come up. So the question is, as educators in early childhood, we often feel we're not heard. Any advice to those of us living with less professional autonomy, such as England? Yeah, keep going.
Okay, sorry, I shouldn't have laughed, but because we can feel like that here too in New Zealand, definitely. Well, I think standing on soapboxes has been part of the early childhood environment for decades. And I don't think we should give up. But I do think we should articulate this in a way, as I said in the talk, in a solution-based way, not just complain, but actually find ways to do this. It's been suggested that we can be rock thinkers, where big rocks are in the way and they seem unclimbable. But if we're water thinkers, water has a lot of power to go with and around and over. And one of our great advocates, one of our great allies are our families, getting families on board. You will know this, Margie, from Pen Green. I mean, Pen Green's practice in terms of drawing families in was so inspiring to us. So listening to lots of other people's perspectives too, and we haven't generated these ideas alone. We've listened to the thoughtfulness of Reggio, and the idea that infants are citizens. That has impact on practice. So there's a lot we can do without necessarily waiting for politicians to make way for us. That doesn't mean to say we're going to let them off the hook, though.
Yeah, never let them off the hook, I would say. Thank you for that. Sean, another question, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Margie. So there's another question from an educator's perspective here, again, asking for some sort of guidance and advice of where to go next, and in particular about how to be better at listening to children and provide them with agency when you know as an adult that you have, and again, this is harking back to Professor Torres' speech yesterday, sort of a heritage of hierarchy and ritualized patterns of action that you need to unpack and unlearn to be able to listen effectively to children. How do you guide professionals to take that step?
Okay, I saw that question. So it's something around how to be better at listening to children and making sure that they have agency when we all have a heritage of hierarchy and ritualized patterns of action that are fairly oppressive, I would guess. Have you got some guidance for us, Lorraine?
Well, I can only speak from my own perspective, I suppose, but I did, when I put that quote in from Peter Moss and Pat Petrie, to make those taken for granted, unquestionable ways of working, to make them feel awkward, give them a stuttering focus, then we can, particularly if we've got we're working in teams where we trust each other, not in teams where judgment is the pejorative way that people work. So flattening that hierarchical structure into a shared distributed leadership format. And we've been working on that at Greaton for decades, because I was at a conference at Pen Green Margie, and you asked me about this question, and I said about distributed shared leadership, and my answer to you was then, well, I'm not that bright. And you laughed, but there was an essence of truth in that, because we can only learn if we listen to each other, if we are in teams, if I have a leadership style that my way is the right way, and whether I say that explicitly or it's just understood by the people in our team, then we won't have the imaginative, thoughtful, progressive ideas coming from teachers who see things actually unfolding in practice and have ideas. They'll keep those ideas to themselves. But if we see this as an opportunity for discussion, for feedback to each other, and for us to wonder, well, how could we do this? What wiser ways could we make this happen? And to let go that power. And I suppose I've never been particularly interested in power, because I see empowerment as a community as much more progressive and much more able to reach objectives than to try and do this with one brain working.
That was very powerful. Thank you. I think I'm reminded of Giulio Formasino's notion of pedagogical isomorphism, that if the teacher doesn't have agency, then the child is never going to have agency. So, it's got to be reciprocal, hasn't it? Thank you for that.
Totally. And of course, we're modeling all of those other dispositions like kindness. If I'm not kind, and we make that very overt, if someone was to offer me a cup of tea, I would talk about that. And not just say, oh, thank you, but I'd say, oh, that's really, really, really kind. I was just thinking I needed something. And here you are, having that initiative yourself. I love that. And then children go off, and when someone's hurt themselves, they're racing off to get an ice pack, because they know that in this place, kindness is what we do. But if we have rules in place in that the ice packs are somewhere in the kitchen where children can't get to, so how's that? So we put stumbling blocks in the way. So how can we remove those stumbling blocks so that children get to have agency, get to actually practice those things that they see valued within our community? So teachers making things from scratch. We've always been the poor cousins in the education sector in early childhood, but that has given us a way of seeing other people's rubbish as our treasure and making things. So it's loose parts has been a wonderful adjunct to early childhood.
Okay, we've only got 2 more minutes, but I did notice a question, Sean. I'm just going to interject that about how does this relate to babies in your centre? There was a question about how can you ask those questions and seek answers from babies and the very youngest children. And I know actually you do that brilliantly. So could you say something about that?
Yeah, well, babies for a start shouldn't be isolated in rooms by themselves. Babies learn in families and obviously toddlers and young children too, with children who are older and younger than themselves. Peter Gray said that children don't learn much from children the same age. So when we put children into rooms by themselves and don't allow them access, there could be a brother or sister 2 rooms away, two play areas away, and this baby can see them through the bars, but they can't reach them. So let's pull down those barriers and allow children to have agency. How often are our doors closed, for example? Are our doors open so that children can choose to be out when they are out? Do they have a whānau teacher who really wraps learning and rhythms and rituals around our babies? And acknowledge that babies don't come to us alone. They come with families, with experience of community. And that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that babies are not, isolated. And so that may be one way to help that. But also, of course, good teacher-child ratios. And that's where politicians need to front up and fund early childhood properly.
Absolutely. Okay, Sean, is the time? Are we out of time, Sean?
I think we we probably got time for one more question, because we started a little bit behind time. So I think if we can just ask one more question, which would be, somebody's asking, how might the inevitable consequences of digital technologies help or hinder what Lorraine has talked about today?
Lorraine, how would the, I mean, the technology you've been using so brilliantly, how can that help or hinder?
Well, as long as it's an adjunct, because we quite enjoy using our online platforms too, and that way we can upload a PDF, not the performers that these platforms provide, because they become very much the same old. So our learning stories, our narrative assessment must look interesting, like a children's picture book, you know, fascinating to want to explore, photographs that are big enough so that children can see the emotion of learning, photographs that include their friends, their teachers in them. And we can upload those onto an online platform. So if I've got grandma who lives in Britain or America, they get to see this this way of their children learning as well. But never, and I can't emphasize this enough, never to take away this book that they hold in their little hot hands and they clasp to their hearts. Because children, I know when anybody comes into our setting, they'll go and grab their books and say, this is me. So learning stories shouldn't be seen as isolated stories about learning activities. They are a continuation of learning which shows this child's progress in learning, stretching forward, and the way teachers have designed an environment that enables them to do this without having to ask too much for, can we have that which is up on the top cupboard? Things are available.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think I'll do the wrapping up now. Can I just thank you so much, Lorraine? You are well beyond the ordinary, you're extraordinary, and your setting. And I want to thank the people who work with you at the early childhood setting in Girton and that community. Also the Educational Leadership Project, which I know has been instrumental in enabling you to work across the country and is a powerful agent for change. And can I thank Sean and Craig for looking after us so brilliantly at this ASERA keynote. I mean, you are a brave pedagogue and you will go on advocating for us. So thank you for that. I'm sure that those who are listening, there's some wonderful stuff on the chat and there's some wonderful stuff in the question section. And I'm sure that we will all continue to interact. And I hope very much that you continue to enjoy the conference. Thank you very much indeed, Lorraine.
Thank you, Margie. Thank you, everyone. My pleasure.
Okay.